Good evening, everyone. It's evening today. Buenas noches a todos. Those who prefer to listen in Spanish can join the live translation of the conference by clicking on the interpretation circle located in the lower left part of the screen and choosing that language. Quienes hablan español pueden escuchar la traducción en vivo de la conferencia haciendo clic en el círculo de interpretación ubicado en la parte baja izquierda de la pantalla y elegir su idioma. Gracias. Thank you. Here to welcome our distinguished co-moderator, Lance J. Brown, FAIA, Advisory Board Member of New York City Architecture Biennial, and also President Consortium for Sustainable Urbanization. Hello, Lance.
Thank you, Natalia, and good evening, everyone. Welcome, or once again, welcome back. The New York City Architecture Biennial is new this year. We're a non-for-profit 503c3 organization that recognizes and exhibits the work and ideas of those talented in architecture, urban design, landscape, environmental, and other design disciplines. Our goals are to promote innovative, sustainable design and to support gender and racial equality around the world. To achieve this, we exhibit the work of emerging and renowned architects and urban designers, landscape architects, environmental, and other design professionals. We provide a platform within which we can consider design creativity. We connect, inform, and support the work of design professionals. We encourage training to achieve gender and racial equality for leadership positions within architectural, urbanism, and other design firms and agencies. We coordinate with public and private organizations to support women and racial diversity in architecture and urbanism, and we encourage the use of construction materials and methods to ensure sustainable design. Very importantly, we have an overarching commitment to collaborate with others to accomplish 5 of the 17 Sustainable Development Goals, the SDGs, of the United Nations by 2030. Yesterday morning, Maria Hurtado de Mendoza presented from Madrid her excellent work and philosophy. You'll be able to find her lecture and our inaugural session on the New York City Architectural Biennial website, 2020 Conference Archive. We would again like to thank our partners, the Consortium for Sustainable Urbanization, the BIM Academy, Driven by Design, Redbal, the Institute for Biodigital Architecture and Genetics, and the International University of Catalunya, Barcelona. Our sponsors, including JP Capizzi Law, Zoho Cloud Solutions, Dezeen, Art News Now, the Commission Project, the Washington Center, Carolina, an OFS company, and OFS, which is providing today their fabulous showroom located on Broadway to broadcast this conference. Last, we'd like to acknowledge the institutions that promoted our event, the AIA New York chapter and their October program, Pratt Institute, Columbia University, the New Jersey Institute of Technology, the New York Institute of Technology, and the ACSA, the National Association of Collegiate Schools of Architecture. Also, the New York State Energy and Research Development Authority, NYSERDA, and magazines, the Monday Morning Quarterback, Architects Newspaper, Archinex, New York Diary, and Interior Design Magazine. And now, it's my pleasure to once again introduce my good friend and co-moderator, Rick Bell, FAIA, Advisory Board Member of the New York City Architectural Biennial, Board Member of the Consortium for Sustainable Urbanization, and faculty member at Columbia University's Center for Buildings, Infrastructure, and Public Space. Over to you, Rick.
Thank you, Lance. It's my great pleasure to be here tonight to present my friend and colleague, Jack Travis, whose work and teaching exemplify the goals of the New York City Architecture Biennial. Those listening today can connect with us all by the Zoom chat room, and you could ask questions of Jack through the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. Jack, it's a great pleasure to see your face here on the screen. Could you please start sharing your screen while I make a very, very brief introduction of your work?
Okay.
Great. Jack, you established your namesake practice in 1985. Please correct me if I'm wrong on any of these facts. And to date, your firm has completed projects for some well-known clients, including Spike Lee, the actor Wesley Snipes, John Saunders of ABC Sports, and fashion retailer Giorgio Armani. Is that an Armani? No. Currently, Jack is working on the flagship exhibition for the Museum of Black Civilization in Dakar, Senegal. You've taught at Parsons School of Design, at the Pratt Institute, and at FIT here in New York City. Also, in the fall of 2014, Jack, you joined the faculty at the School of Visual Arts. It's like a hat trick, I think, to be able to teach students in so many different schools at the same time. You've broadened your interest beyond cultural content strategies to sustainable environmental design methodologies, alternative educational practices, such as a community design studio, and the entrance of more students of color into the studios and of academia and the realities of the profession. Jack, I'm so glad you're here.
Thank you, Rick. Thank you very much. That was a very nice introduction. And thank you, Lance. It's always good to see you. And my new friend, Natalia, thank you so much. I believe I'm not in control of the festivities here. So I think we'll start with the video, and then I'll start my presentation after that. Thank you very much. I believe that there are three phases in an architect's career. There's a point of beginning, a point of reference, and then a point of departure. For me, my point of beginning has always been to look at the inhabitants of the space intended. I learned that by growing up in Las Vegas on the west side, a predominantly Black neighborhood, where the trained architects and engineers did not want to come in the 1950s and 1960s to build our community. The people who built our community looked like me, and they were untrained. And one of the lessons that I learned is how important it is for the stakeholder to have some kind of interaction from the very beginning of the process in design. I would say that my point of reference is modernism. I admire the work of Richard Meyer. I also like Frank Lloyd Wright and the earth integrated idea of architecture with nature and the ground plane. And finally, Louis Kahn, who I think is a master of the idea of monumentality and the idea of formal dynamics being very, very important to speaking to the community and to the stakeholders. Lastly, my point of departure. For the last 25 years, I've been looking at culture and how culture impacts and affects the idea and attitude of spatial dynamic, the bodies in space, and the particulars around the cultural dynamic for each of those bodies is very important. My work tries to identify a Black aesthetic in architecture. It's a very interesting and tall order. It's very controversial in many, many ways, and I understand that. But it's important for me to study identity. Identity relates then to aesthetic. Aesthetic then connects again back to the idea of an architecture that is timeless and meaningful, but ultimately an architecture that relates to the people it's intended. Interior design then becomes very relevant. It is the most open between the two, architecture and interiors, for I think a new identity to evolve within. So over the past years, I've looked at and evolved 10 principles, which I think are very, very important to my work and very, very important into realizing this Black identity. The first four, economy, simplicity, ease of construction, and ease of maintenance, they all have to do with resource or the lack thereof, which you find in almost every Black enclave community society in the entire world, whether we are diasporic outside of Africa or of the continent within the continent of Africa, particularly sub-Saharan Africa. Resource is very important. So how we build our buildings, what they cost, how the materials go together, how we can get those materials, how we can teach people to build with those materials. And then after the project is done, how that project has an ease of maintenance so that it doesn't become an issue is very important. And those are the first four. The second three have to do with identity, body politic, the way we are. And they are spirituality, heritage, and what I call the irony of our condition, where you find Black people worldwide in a condition of desperation. It's sad, but it's true. And as an architect who is a problem solver, I've got to learn to deal with this situation. We've got to look at it critically, and we've got to understand the reasons why, but we can't rely on just understanding that systemic racism, for instance, and attitudes about people being privileged and feeling supreme exists, but we have to know that those are the challenges. And I think as a problem solver, I've been trained to be able to look at these problems without causing disabling despair. The last three have to do with design, finally, and they are strong indoor-outdoor relationship. We are earth-centered, we are earth-nurturing, and then finally we have an intense approach to use of color, texture, and pattern. And you can see this almost everywhere in what we do as Africans, people who define themselves as African on the planet. You can see it in fashion, you can see it in dance, you can see it in almost any other aspect of art. In the environmental disciplines, it is hidden in plain view, I believe, under so many different layers of a dominant culture and a series of other cultures that know who they are. They know their homeland, they have a different language, and they know where they come from. And what you find with a lot of Africans is that we don't know that. And so this idea that we still are acclimated and focused on these principles for actually going forward is, I think, quite unique and quite exciting for me, even though it's a tremendous challenge.
Cultural design was always looked at as a trend. You know, like, oh, this season we're looking towards Africa for inspiration, or next season it's Asia, next season it's Native American, and it just struck me as very odd. It's like, my culture is not a trend. It's not something that you can take on, take off, is out of fashion or in fashion. And I was like, there's got to be a better way to approach this that's more reasonable and realistic for someone from these various backgrounds. I began to realize that this can be approached. There's a need for it because of just the sheer lack of expression and what we see, we ourselves, what our children see, how others can perceive us through our built spaces, and all of those relationships combined.
And finally, as a Black architect, I feel like I have to be a number of different things. I have to be better just to be in. So I find myself having to mentor as well as practice. I find myself having to be an advocate of other Black architects because I have a position. I find myself having to be an orator. And an orator for me is a person who has to shout out, who has to tell the public that we are here and that there's a different way that we can actually approach architecture that makes us relevant. And finally, I think that I have to be a preacher-teacher, and that preacher-teacher is a person who embraces academia, which has so many flaws in terms of equity and in terms of inclusion. It's the base, it's where we begin, it's where we start to get our education. And so I want to be at the forefront of that aspect as well. It's trying, it's tough. You don't get as much done as you would like, and you don't reach certain heights that you would like. But I think as a Black architect in my career, the last 35 years, I have to say that I'm proud of the work that I do and the work that I will continue to do.
Okay, everybody, we're back. I'd like to start off with the first slide talking about the idea of atmospheres and perspectives. Atmospheres and perspectives are concepts that we talk about often in design, and Usually they have a very narrow sort of focus. Within that narrow focus, it's pretty broad, but the focuses are narrow when you're on the outside of that. So an atmosphere for, I think, a lot of young Black students to come into architecture has not evolved. It is not a place where I think we find ourselves comfortable in large numbers. And I'll talk about that a little bit later. And in order for that to happen, I think we've got to have perspectives on, again, Blackness and this idea of a broader, open sense of what particularly the design studio needs to be, because that is the precursor of what the profession ought to be. Next. So you heard in the video me talk about the 5 kinds of aspects that I think I have to be as a Black architect. And I know that architects, in general, we have to be several things because of the nature of our business. But again, I find that, for me, I have to be at a heightened sense on all 5 of these throughout my career. And every time I reach a certain level in one, the other 4 have to be brought up in terms of intensity. Why? Because again, with that position and with the condition that we find ourselves in, it's extremely important. Next. So I did a book, 1992, because I didn't have a book on Black architects. I profiled 35 architects, we'll talk about that later, but I wanted to go to someone and ask them, why aren't people who look like me in these books? So I traveled in 1991 to Yale University and I spoke to Vincent Scully. And I asked him to write in my book and he said he would. And I said, in order to do that, sir, I think you need to apologize for a number of things. And he looked at me for about 3 seconds and he smiled and he says, I'll do that. And these are the first words that he wrote in my book. And I'll be ever thankful to him because he gave me the energy to move forward with the book and with the idea of inclusion that I practice today. Next. So I'm going to go quickly through because I want to show you now just some of my work, but I want to get to some more important facts later. And I think, again, practice is very important. So what I do is important. My work is my point of beginning. The inquiry into my Blackness is my point of reference. And then the result of what I do, I think, is my point of departure. So obviously, these 4 clients were very pivotal for me. I was very lucky to have all 4 of them in the beginning. Next. Giorgio Armani, I learned to detail. I learned to understand proportion and scale and the larger picture of possibility of the narrative of telling a story of a brand. And space planning was very, very important. Next, there's a 10,000 square foot floor, and to lay that floor out with a mastery that the Armani Corporation and brand identifies with and demands was very challenging, but at the same time, as a young designer, just coming into the practice and starting my firm, it was very important to me. In fact, they gave me $20,000 to start my firm. Next. And then 5 years later, I met Spike Lee. I was his first architect. We did the first residence for him. Here you see the brownstone in Brooklyn near Fort Greene Park. Next. And then after meeting Spike Lee, I met Wesley Snipes. We did 4 houses for him, 2 in New York City, 1 in Florida, and this one in Los Angeles. Next. This is the New York residence, a 6,500 square foot loft on Broadway and Bleecker, downtown Manhattan. It was the Fuller Toms residence that Peter Eisenman designed, his #1 interiors project. Wesley Snipes hated it, and I loved it. I couldn't believe he hated this place. So he said, can you do something in here? And I go, yeah, we'll do a little something, but we won't do a lot of something because this is really an incredible place. He wanted more energy in it. And then I thought to him, it's really about Blackness. Next. So what we tried to do is take a portion of it, the portion where he rests, and see if we can manipulate it and give it some kind of energy that was compatible, but a different direction for our client in this space, in this iconic space. Next. And so the idea was to take the bathroom and the bedroom and to provide a different sort of identity and a slightly off-color white paint that talked about, again, this threshold, this energy, this space, spiritual enclave, really, of an other. Next. John Saunders was the culmination of the 4. We did an 8,000 square foot house for him. There was an existing 4,000 square foot house on the property, and we added an additional 4,000 square feet. The house topsided 3 levels, wife and 2 children, just a great client to have. Next. The house went through 3 iterations over a year, almost a year and a half in design alone. The clients were just wonderful for us. And this is the first iteration. Next. This is the second iteration, same site, same property, same program. Next. So what's driving it is budget, obviously. Next. Here's some sketches of the facade. Next. And then this is the third iteration, and this is the one that was built. Next. So the property is on 2 acres of land, 100 feet above the Hudson River, looking to the New Jersey Palisades west. Next. Some more models of the house. Next. And here's the house under construction. Very volumetric, allowed us to try to figure out both exterior and interior, an applied sort of sensibility of another cultural dynamic for him. Next. Here's the house built and a drone view from the overlooking the river, as I said before, and then an interior, a couple of interior shots. Next. Even in the plan identity, we tried to figure out how we could create other types of spatial dynamics without compromising the full function of the house for the family. Next. I've done over a dozen apartment projects or residential projects in Harlem. Here you see 3 of them. Next. But the one that I think that gave me the most satisfaction was this one. This is the Giddens residence, and Bernadette Berry, who you saw in the video, my partner. She and I worked on this project, and as an architect trained person, I learned a lot about what I did not know about interiors. Interiors is my first love now. And without the help of interiors trained people, it's very difficult for me to reach the subtle nuances in design and furnishing that I have met over the last years. And I think this residence 1,200 square foot apartment is the culmination of that. Next. Again, strong cultural identity in our work. Next. With TP&G, I worked for Carver Federal Bank, the largest Black-owned bank in the Northeast, I think still. We did about maybe 8 to 10 projects for them. Next. We do a lot of storyboards for our clients because, again, what we do is fairly different and provocative. And so they ask us to explain our direction, and we try to make it very clear what we're trying to do and what kind of story, what kind of narrative we're telling in the design. Next. So here you see some examples, and here's the storyboard for the Harlem Hospital project, which was the new patient pavilion on Lenox Avenue at 135th Street and 36th Street, actually. And the storyboard is about the idea of us out of Africa and up from slavery. Next. We've done furniture in the past as well. This is the front desk in the lobby of the Kalahari condominiums on 116th Street in Harlem. Next. And these are benches for a Columbia University project. Next. Even our palette boxes where we show our materiality to our clients, we try to do, again, in the design that evokes another other. Complete total graphic presentation. Next. Next. And so a couple of projects, again, in collaboration. We have evolved a part of our practice to be consultants, and we call ourselves cultural consultants in design. So on larger projects, when I don't have the larger office personnel and experience, I can work on them with architects like Fred Schwartz, who was a dear friend of mine, and the collaboration was great. Next. In the office was a gentleman by the name of Doug Romines, and between Doug, Fred, and I, and a great client, Full Spectrum, a Harlem-based development corporation, we were able to do the masking of the facade of this government-subsidized housing building. This is 247 apartments, condominiums, of which 50% were affordable, with 50% being market rate. The first time that we broke the 70-30, 80-20 model to be 50-50, and the apartments were sold out before the building was completed in 2012. Next. And here you see again our storyboard for this particular project and a sample of how the pattern was evolved, and it's just again the coloring of the brick. It's a standard bond layup pattern of brick, and the only thing that's changed is the colors, and it's Doug Romines again who just incredibly worked out this facade. Next. And here you see it under construction. Next. And the Harlem Hospital, 6 stories, as I said before, new patient pavilion. Next. The facade includes the theme, Black People Up from Slavery. It comes from the WPA project art that was in the hospital, in the building that we had to tear down, to raise rather, in order to build this building. So we kept the art and we brought the art out onto the building to the people. Next. Some other images of the building itself. Next. Our storyboard for this particular project. Next. Modeling. Next. And some early perspectives of the elevator lobbies, et cetera, telling the story again of Black people and what we've contributed in 15 different locations out of Africa in the New World. Next. And here's a portal from the new patient pavilion into this public space that we closed the 136th Street and made this public area for the community to live and work. And on the left-hand side, you see the OR rooms and the nurses station. And then on the right-hand side, you see some of the cultural dynamics in the children's ward that Bernadette Berry, my partner, delivered. Next. I've been published a number of times. Next. And so in that publishing, next please, you know, again, you get this voice, and again, you have to reach beyond just the notion of just traditional practice to something else. But first I want to take you back where I grew up. This is Las Vegas on the left-hand side, somewhere in the 1960s. I was in grade school at the time, and you can see that there's a lot of vacant space. And then on the right-hand side is Las Vegas now, for any of you who've ever been there. And next. And so the Las Vegas that I knew growing up was, as I said in the video, built by the people who looked like me. I thought that that was incredible. I thought that that was fantastic. And I learned a lot just looking at, again, how the men in particular in the neighborhood took the reins and the force and protected the community and built the community. Next. It was a poor community. And then I was thrusted into Arizona State University, 32,000 students, and then graduate school at University of Illinois in Champaign-Urbana, 34,000 students. And it's a whole nother world. And the first thing that I learned is to not like what I grew up in, and not like who was building the buildings and doing the engineering in my neighborhood. Because there was a new way to think. There was a new objective about excellence. And I want to talk about that a little bit later. Next. And so I went to learn about excellence. And I got hired at SOM. At the time, they were the #1 firm in the world. This is 1980, and I was there till the middle of 1982. And in those 2.5 years, it was excellent. I learned the most comprehensive information about building, making a good set of construction documents, doing specs, and being able then to specify and look for furniture and lighting like never before. The projects that we worked on were just the primo projects in the world, and I had a great time. Next. But right around the corner was this Black gentleman who was rising, and he was an interior designer. I went to see him one day around the corner, and I got hired, and I left SOM for Lou Schweitzer. Schweitzer Group at that time was about 5 or 6 people. He's now 65 people. And Lou, again, was this other lesson for me. He allowed me great leeway and responsibility. And in 13 months, working about 65 hours on average a week, I delivered 3 projects and all 3 got published. My first 3 projects to get published, including our own office that we were working in. Next. So that journey was very, very important. And 1985, I started my own firm in the greatest city in the world, the city I love, and the city I think I'll die in. New York City is just a great place for me. Next. So now I want to take you quickly through a journey, and I'm watching the time. And this journey is not easy because it is about the reason why the inquiry had to be made, my point of reference. And this is about racism. Next. So this was a statement that I wrote in my book. And like Derek Bell, please forgive me, and hopefully you walk through this phase with me, because I think there are lessons learned here. Next. We want to go through it very quickly. So anyway, most of us who are Black know Negro moments. And those are those moments where you're the first one, the only one, or one of a few. And these happen in design, particularly environmental design, a lot. Next. And then it's nice to know that somebody out there is thinking like you, that you're not the only one thinking about these things. You know, why aren't there more people who look like me? What's going on? Is it us? Are we incompetent? Are we not suitable? What is the issue? Next. And then you find out that there's this level of resistance. Now, I don't know, I've never met any of these 3 men, but I've read information that they've put out. And I know that I'm not included in any, and I know that these are the experts. So Christian Norberg-Schultz is an expert on architecture history. And Stanley Abercrombie wrote A Century of Interior Design, a century of interior design. And Arthur Drexler was head of MoMA when Jean-Michel Basquiat passed away. And the idea of him being the first Black person in the museum was entertained, of which Mr. Drexler had no comment on. And Stanley Abercrombie has not one single page in his book on anything Black. And Christian Norberg-Schultz talks about Northern African architecture for the first 43 pages of a 436-page book, and nothing about Blackness or sub-Saharan Africa mentioned. Next. So now what do? Right? You study white men, and these white men are serious. They are movers and shakers, as we all know. They are the top, and they are the reasons why we think about modern architecture and postmodern architecture and post architecture. It's because of their contributions that we have a worldwide sense of modernism in architecture. Where are we? Next. We're not there. And so the next 5 slides really are quotes from Whitney M. Young from an AIA speech about 52 years ago this year. You know, what's happening? What is it about Black people in this country, in this world in general, that is so hard to understand when it comes to equity and inclusion, not seeing ourselves? Next. And what do we say about that? The better people of us, not the ones that we know are the crazies, who identify with the fact that they are supremacists. But what about us who know better, who teach our children better? Are we doing everything that we need to do? Next. These are questions for us, and not only white people, but Black people as well. And in the profession, architecture, building for the world, building for all of the people in the world. Do we really? And how can over so many decades can we be so marginalized as a people in this profession? Next. We have to get to the issue, and the issue is deep and it's strong. Where does the problem begin? And when you know where the problem begins, how can you have a conversation that is productive and fruitful and that will allow more equity and inclusion? That is our issue. And what that takes is a lot of people looking in the mirror, trying to understand exactly where the problem begins. Next. And when those people look in the mirror, maybe there's a chance for people who are dysfunctional, disenfranchised, to organize themselves and turn themselves around, and that the world then can become a little bit more excellent. Next. I want to quickly go through, and even our best and brightest and most talented have issues. And so what does that tell you? That tells you that there is a problem. And why aren't we able to solve it? Next. I tend to agree, for the most part, with Gore Vidal in the idea of what is the responsibility of the artist and the designer. And it is for us to get a look out of the prison that we find ourselves in. And the prison, again, is all of that layering of injustice and inequity and selfishness that all of us have in ourselves, that keeps us from, again, opening up and being true citizens, true humans to one another, right? I think the true artist has to look out and has to find a way to make other people look out. And that look out is art or design. Next. 4 minutes. So what do? You jump. If you have any energy at all, you can't sit and you can't let it bother you. You've got to get up and do something. Next. But you have to know what the issue is. Next. And so I did a book. And the one thing that I found out about doing a book is that I'm not a writer. But I had to do it because nobody offered it to me. Next. And after my book, several books. Next. 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 I have chronicled some 49 books on Blackness and design since 1992, my book being launched by Princeton Architectural Press. 49 at this point and counting. Next. Next. And what about our legacy? This is Amazali Meredith. She may be the first Black modernist architect in the country. I don't have time to go into it, but she built a home after going to the Bauhaus and studying, untrained. Next. And what about our legacy? The Robert Taylors, the Bertner Tandys, the J. Max Bond Juniors. Next. The Jillian Abels and the Revere Williamses and the Wallace A. Rayfields. Who are these people and do we know? Next. 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 Kurt Moody is the architect who is the most successful Black architect in history. Lou Schweitzer is the most successful interior designer in history. McKissick & McKissick is the first African-American architecture firm out of Nashville. First in the country, still going today. Next. And then there are the women architects, extraordinary, from 1940s pretty much on. Next. Then there's our architectural historians. Never one to leave out a non-Black significant person in their relationship to telling the story of Black architects. Next. Then there's the African architects of note. In my opinion, these are the 3 top African architects in the world, arguably, but my opinion. Next. And then there's others, all the different countries, and all of these are sub-Saharan architects. Next. And there's the women. Next. Sheikh Gam and Damas Nuwoko are our grandfathers in architecture. Here are 2 men who practiced in the late 40s, early 50s. They are the godfathers, if not the grandfathers, of architecture. Senegal and Nigeria. There's not a single picture of Sheikh Gam on the internet. If somebody can find it, please send it to me. I've looked. And there's only a few pictures of late of Damas Nuwoko. Next. And when you look into what they've done some extraordinary things. with, again, another sort of sensibility to it since the 1940s and 50s. Next. And I don't know this growing up. We have new people today, provocative people who are pushing and challenging the notion of what architecture standards are. Olalekan, we call him Lake Jayufis, next. His is sci-fi architecture, Afro architecture. Amanda Williams talks about the idea of colored space and colored theory, next. And then there's Lauren. And Lauren is not even trained as an architect. She's just about 30, second generation hip hop. Next. And then there are the hip hop gurus in architecture, right? Sekou Cook, next. And the hip hop architecture himself, Michael. We are looking at a whole nother different idea of excellence, because how do you put the people I just showed you in our books? Well, you cannot. You cannot with the idea and notion of excellence that we have today. And if we tried, and we're going to try, it's still going to be marginalized. It's still going to be second class. So the point is that there's got to be a new idea of excellence. And when that happens, the floodgates open. But we have to understand that we're pioneers. We have to start something new. And in that new, there is no excellence. There's only a movement towards a new excellence that hopefully is more inclusive. Right? So I'm going to stop it here and take questions. And thank you all very much.
Jack, thank you. Thank you for those remarks, for those amazing images. What you have achieved is truly extraordinary. The video and the themes that you wove together, I'd say they illustrate how your projects, your teaching, and your activism for the creation of an inclusive society defines your career and serves as an exemplary model for all of us to emulate. You and I have been friends for a long time, and I remember as if it were yesterday how thrilling it was to put the name of Naikoba Noma on the front door of the AIA New York Chapter Center for Architecture. You did that, we did that together. Brought programs, meetings, and advocacy of the two organizations into one space. Now you're a member, I read, of NOMA's Council of Elders. Where the hell did the time go? What you presented, Jack, today is a manifesto, an excellent manifesto of what is to be the next. How now the General Society, you might say, has, I hope, more fully recognized the endemic racism in our professions, our offices, and in our institutions. Jack, you've said that, quote, practice and pedagogy are integral parts of the traditional role of any architect, but you noted, and again, specifically today, that a Black architect in today's society and all throughout the past has had to shoulder the extra burden of being an advocate and mentor for everybody. Your talk today provided, seems to me, further insight by being very specific about 10 principles that are important to your work and creating a Black aesthetic you define as controversial, perhaps, I don't know, in all the environmental design disciplines, not just architecture, but also interior design and elsewhere, urban design. The combination of economy, simplicity, ease of construction, ease of maintenance, spirituality, heritage, irony, nature, a strong indoor-outdoor relationship, and the enjoyment of color, texture, and pattern. These are a guide for us all. Thank you for that, my friend. And I was going to end, and I won't end on time, Natalia, forgive me, but I was going to end by thanking you also for the poster that you just made, titled "We Keep From Going Under," that was made in support of the Black Artists and Designers Guild. It was supposed to come in the mail today, so I put it on the brick wall behind me. When it gets here, I'm going to ask you to sign it. That'll make it more special. But I was thinking about what it means, we keep from going under. And coincidentally or not, it was, I think, in the same year, within months, the book that you wrote and the book that Derek Bell is best known for, I Wish You Were a Relation. I call him my cousin. We're not related, but I feel that we are. Faces at the Bottom of the Well came out in 1992. You said your book was in that year. And the quote that you had in your talk, it appeared, The challenges throughout have been to tell what I view as the truth about racism without causing disabling despair. You know, I don't claim to know Derek Bell. I'm not Derek Bell, but he had two other quotes that are relevant and that I'd like to kind of posit as Natalia goes into the Q&A as maybe the first question, because the talk today was about architecture and how you start an office and how you make it work, but it was also about racism. And I think we need to talk about that as much as how many people are in your office, or, you know, how do you get a commission? Derek wrote in a positive note, perhaps, education leads to enlightenment. Enlightenment leads the way to empathy. Empathy foreshadows reform. I think that's positive. I would say, is reform enough, you know, as a coda to that. And then he wrote maybe in a more negative way, and later, not in that book, almost 20 years ago. He died about 10 years ago in October. It appears that my worst fears have been realized. We have made progress in everything, yet nothing has changed. Maybe there's a question in there, but I'm not the question. I'm not the Q&A. It's my job, happily, to introduce Natalia Valencia, who will do that and do it very, very well, as she did yesterday morning with Maria Hurtado. For those who missed that, go to the videotape. But Natalia is the founder and president of the New York City Architecture Biennial. She's an architect originally from Argentina who moved to New York, moved to US, I guess in New Haven originally, to work with Cesar Pelli and Kevin Roach. I think it was just to work with Cesar Pelli, but you could talk to that, Natalia. She subsequently moved to New York City 10 years ago and now continues her architectural career at Perkins Eastman. Natalia will be the moderator of the audience Q&A session. And Jack, I also just wanted to thank you for bringing your business partner into the discussion. It's all about collaboration, your collaboration with Fred and others within your office, outside of your office. Phenomenal. Thank you again.
Perry is a godsend for my firm.
Yeah. Natalia, it's all yours. Thank you for the privilege of being here today with you all.
Thank you, Rick, so much.
Bye.
Okay, so thank you, Rick and Lance, for your assistance founding this organization and for being the moderators of this event. And Jack, it is a pleasure to come with your presence. Tonight, you gave us an extremely instructive presentation, and I personally feel enriched. Your career is serving so many people around you, and we are glad that we have the opportunity today to expand your experiences to our audience, and I particularly like that we were able to translate in Spanish to even expand that audience. We see a large audience, and thank you for being here. It's quite international, as this conference is as well. But well, I'll say thank you again to everybody, and I'll start to see what questions we have from the audience. But I'll start with asking you that at the beginning of your career, you were the designers for brands more related to European culture, like such Emporium Money. How did your career evolve after that to a more African American style? What was your process?
Yeah, I think the first question is, how did my career evolve to that level, right? Coming from where I came from, I have to say that I've been truly lucky. And whenever I got an opportunity, I tried to make the best of it. But you have to have still people whose shoulders you stand on. The first Black architect I ever met, I should tell you, I hated. I saw him, and he just reminded me of all the things that I had neglected over time, trying to be the best that I can be and following this line of excellence. So I had to grapple with that, and I met him in school in my undergraduate fourth year, I think, at Arizona State University. So when I worked for SOM, and after a couple of years, I got the job at Armani, particularly because I worked for SOM. It was an eye-opener again, because then I had to realize that I can embrace those things again that I sort of denied before, but I can embrace them in a new way, and I can still learn something very, very special, and reach my own level of excellence. So as I worked for Armani, I learned that I could do anything that I wanted to do, and that I could be with the best. To actually work and talk to him and his architect, Giancarlo Ortelli, was very, very special and meaningful for someone coming from where I come from. And then I got a call from Wynn Thomas, Spike Lee's set designer. And I got that call because I was published for Armani. So to me, all of these are connections. And so I think you don't look at a situation when you're hurting and you're trying to find yourself, and I think most young people do this, you take each opportunity, you make the best of that. And then when you get to something that is really part and parcel of your directive, then you grab a hold of it. But it's all of that process before that's going to be important for you in order to go forward beyond that. So I think that that's what's important. And after working for Giorgio Armani and Spike Lee, it was very easy after that. The newspapers would call you. First of all, they'd never call in the magazine, and then they would call all the time. So.
Oh, thank you. Yeah, I think that there are places that opens doors to, when you have experience there. So there, during the video, you mentioned 10 of your principles for aesthetic to design. And is there any of them that you consider the most relevant for the Black culture?
I think they're all relevant for how I practice design. You and I were speaking earlier, and I was telling you that right now 100% of my clients are Black. And I love that. It's not that I want to be exclusive or to parse out people, but that's where I've been trying to get to, trying to think about this. And one day I was sitting and I was thinking to myself, if every Black architect, every registered Black architect would do work in the Black community, all of us would be busy for years, because there's so much work to do, from infrastructure work to creative work. And it doesn't matter what our directive is or our talent level, there's enough work for us to do to clean up our communities. So I'm really kind of interested and focused on all of those principles. If I had to pick one, I would say it really is about the irony of the condition, because that's the one that has to be borne out, I think, for us to move to the next level. Rick was talking about the fact that he was the Bell quote that he read, I fear that, we've made progress, but things are still the same. Derek Bell's quote. I think that's another way of saying one step forward and two steps backwards, which is a common saying in the Black community. And we have to watch out for that, right? So the irony of the condition, that seventh of my principles, is very important. And I don't have time here, but I can explain how we actually brought that through into the Saunders home, right? So we try to infuse them all, but they're not blatant. They don't need to be in your face, but they need to be subtle. And our clients need to be able to tell their children about these things. These things are embedded in the environment that you live, play, and grow up in. And if you look close enough, you will see them. And if you look within yourself, you will see yourself. And the architecture, for me, has to play a part in that. Art plays a part in that. Why can't architecture play a part in that?
Agreed. So another thing here is, like, there's no many architects of color in the US, maybe 500 in total, I'm not sure.
3,600.
How many?
About 3,600 that we know of.
Okay. And so there is a problem of a student getting into architecture, like people choosing architecture. Why do you think that's the case, or why they're not choosing architecture?
Well, as I said, there are 3,600 architects that we think we know of. Dennis Mann and Bradford Grant put together a directory, which you can go online. I think it's a Black or African American architects directory. And find that list, right? 3,600 seems like a big number maybe to some, but if you realize that there's over 100,000 registered architects in the United States, and something like 98,000 are in the AIA. And we're 13.5% of the population at 40 million Black people in America. And I think we're now at 320 million people in the country. It's not a lot. In fact, it's probably about 1/10 of what it should be. So we should have 35,000 Black architects or so, you know, and we don't.
You mentioned,
Well,
you mentioned that you take action to involve more or to capture more students of color. What do you do in particular? Like, how do you?
Well, in the 90s, I ran a student summer workshop in my office because, again, so many students were asking me to talk after hearing my lecture and hearing about my book, which came out in 1992, as you heard. And I did that for 7 years. And I want to revive that now that we have Zoom and we know that we can go online and have classes. And then I can bring students worldwide together. And we would do that in the summer. Because there are still a lot of students who call me who are in the undergrad and graduate programs at majority universities. And they say for their thesis or for a project that they're doing at upper level, they want to do more of a cultural inclusion into it. And they find that their professors can't help them with that, at least to some depth level that they'd like to go to. So we want to be online. We want to be organized. We want to have a summer workshop where people can come in and they can hear how we approach, what our strategies are in approaching a Black aesthetic.
Well, thank you. I think we should coordinate something with the Biennial. Definitely, it would be very, very interesting. So, and I have another question here. It came in Spanish. Do you believe that the design principle, whether it's economy, simplicity, or maintenance, concepts that are used in African can be applied in similar ways in Latin America, given the economic problems that are maybe similar?
That's a very, very good question. I think that evolved principles that are based on cultural specifics for a particular area or a group of people, yes, I think they can evolve and they can be useful. I shy away from a collective sort of sense of principles. I'd much rather individuals evolve their own principles and that we all get together and discuss how we all approach design from different perspectives. Those 5 white men that I showed you earlier in one of the slides, they all got together and they tried to organize and push something together. And it did some good things in the beginning, but ultimately it was a disaster. And ultimately it wasn't inclusive. So for me, it's better that someone in a Latin American country come to me and say, Jack, this is how I practice. And then I can say, oh, well, this is how I practice. And then someone else can come in and we can just look at all the things that we're thinking about, because all of us are individuals on one level, and that individuality can inform a bigger collective if we all have a common goal about that collective. And that common goal is simply more cultural dynamic, and for me, Blackness in design. So I'm all for people coming up and evolving their own principles for how they approach their work. Culture definitely included.
Well, thank you, Jack. We don't have too much more time for more questions. I have to give this to Lance so he can wrap up the lecture. But thank you again very much, and thank you to all the audience that is quite large today. Thank you.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
Lance, you're mute.
I'm mute and I cannot start my video. Starting my video is not that important, but I wouldn't mind being with you. Jack,
you have your video.
Jack, thank you. Your video and your discussion were both very, very rich. I personally cannot say how important your voice and your work has been for me over the years. I think you know that. I think you remain a guiding light in our still too unresolved, too complex, and too troubled context. So I expect you to say more and say it loud for a long time.
Thank you, Lance. Thank you so much.
Thank you to Natalia and Rick, my co-moderators, and our entire New York City Biennale team, and all of you, all the attendees, for joining us this evening. Please join us again tomorrow evening for the Biennale Roundtable discussion. A group of distinguished architects will present their perspectives on the theme of the Biennale, writ large tonight, inclusion in the workplace and in design. We'll be hearing from Ronette Riley, FAIA, principal of her eponymous firm. Ronette's a graduate of the University of California in Berkeley and the Harvard Graduate School of Design. Danny Cesario, AIA, RIBA, and National Organization of Minority Architects, NOMA, is the 333rd Black woman in American history to earn her architectural license. She's currently a project manager at SOM, following in Jack's footsteps. Danny graduated from the School of Architecture at the City College of New York, where I'm very proud to say she was a student of mine, and I count her a good friend. Laurie Hawkinson, AIA, co-founder of Smith, Miller, and Hawkinson. Laurie is a professor at Columbia University, the Graduate School of Architecture, Planning, and Preservation, where Columbia, where Rick is at the moment. Laurie holds degrees from the University of California at Berkeley and from Cooper Union. Maria Perabellini, AIA, OIA, the Dean of the School of Architecture and Design at the New York Institute of Technology. Maria earned her degrees from Pratt Institute and the Istituto Universitario de Arquitectura de Venezia. And Joan Krevlin, FAIA lead, lead numbers A through C, is a partner at BKSK in New York. Joan's a distinguished alumni with a BA and MArch degrees from Washington University in St. Louis, and also a past professor who I actually hired at the City College. You can learn more about these speakers and all of the others in our conference on the conference website. The roundtable tomorrow is our closing event of the 2020 New York City Architecture Biennale. It'll start at 7 p.m. Of course, we hope to see you there. You can use the same link that you used today. As I said yesterday, please, please, please again, if you're a UN citizen, do vote. Remember to vote. Remember to take a friend with you.
Thank you, Lance.
I'm now going to see the debate on television, so I wish you all a very, very good evening.
Thank you so much, all. Bye-bye.
Thank you, Jack.